So welcome to another edition of On the Trail of Delusion, where I try to separate the wheat from the chaff and try to give you something substantial on the JFK assassination rather than the usual pap you find on the internet. So today my guest is Dr. Martin Kelly. Dr. Kelly has a BA in Science from Columbia, a PhD in experimental psychology from Tufts University in 1970. He was professor emeritus at Hobart and William Smith College, and he's got over 30 years experience in teaching, and he is just brilliant. And he knows this case in and out, and always has something interesting to say. And I refer people back to my first interview with Dr. Kelly on this channel. Have a look at a terrific interview about the medical evidence in the case of single bullet theory, the reactions of Kennedy and Connolly. Have a look, it's terrific. So welcome, Dr. Kelly, to the podcast.
Nice to be here again, Fred.
So let's kick off with, let's talk about the psychology of Lee Harvey Oswald, because I did a video about that, but I think you have some comments and a lot to add to his psychology.
Well, yeah, I was stimulated by the Scott Mosley interview, in which he talked about Oswald's problems in a kind of empirical way by listing the kinds of facts about Oswald that conspiracy people don't usually mention. And so that was important to me. But there's not a lot of information from the kind of psychological world that puts Oswald's psychology into a kind of context where you can discuss it in a kind of predictive way. And so, I thought that's why I made a comment on the video that you had posted. And so, what might be of use here is to realize that Oswald, first of all, he has a psychiatric record. The psychiatric record is quite clear, and it's quite precise. It could have been more precise had he been in residence or in custody for a longer period of time and had extensive testing, but it wasn't.
Right.
And so, that'll come up as I discuss it, what was said about him and what was shown about him, and then try to see where that fits in with Oswald as an adult acting in the real world and shooting Kennedy. Before we start, we have to be aware that you can go to the internet and you can go to the Facebook pages and look at all these conspiracy people who claim that, well, the Oswald was not insane, he wasn't psychotic, he was very intelligent, so he couldn't have been crazy. And you get a lot of talk in ordinary language from ordinary life about what his mental state was. That's not going to work in understanding Oswald. You have to understand what kind of diagnoses were dropped on him, what kind of theoretical structures that we can use to talk will apply to his actions, and then you can get a better picture of it. Now, people in general are not used to doing this. In fact, in some ways, as you and I discussed the last time I was on here, the Western culture has become less and less abstract and more concrete and pop culture like. So the idea that you would abstract from a situation and start talking about what explains it in a kind of objective way is not the mode that people act in these days. So I want to make sure that people understand that when we talk about Oswald, his behavior and his symptoms and so forth are at the side of action, and it's out in the real world. The reason why he has these particular kinds of actions and behaviors are part of the theoretical structure of his psychology. And it's the part of the theoretical structure that is rarely discussed or even acknowledged by the conspiracy theory. Okay, they just ignore him. And so then Oswald is a cipher. What do you want him to be? I want him to be a spy. I want him to be a dupe. Okay, I want him to be innocent. Okay, I mean, this is what you get, as if he had no internal dynamics at all. And to Gerald Posner's credit, in Case Closed, there's a first book actually to do an extensive initial movement on Oswald. I mean, he pointed out that he was ignored, et cetera, et cetera. And so we all learned a lot from that. It led all of us to the record and the psychiatric report and so forth, which is now available online. So with that in mind, I'm going to make a couple of quick distinctions, okay?
Yeah.
In a kind of neo-analytic way, neo-psychoanalytic way, neo-Freudian way, anything like that, Oswald has a very, very weak ego, and the ego is the portion of the psychic apparatus which deals with the real world and involves thinking and acting and planning and so forth, but involves one's sense of place in the world, and that's a very big deal. And so he had a weak ego, and one of the things that psychoanalysts worry about is if you look at a patient or look at a person, and the person has difficulty in establishing ego boundaries. That is, any difference between the person's ego and the objects of the world. And if you can't hold those distinctions, then there's a way in which the world becomes seen as part of the ego, and therefore the world becomes fantasized according to the individual whims of the person's ego, and not according to the laws of existence that govern the world itself.
Right.
And so you get that. Really extreme egos, like in psychosis or schizophrenia, they're almost invisible. They're almost as small as a pea and have no boundaries, and everything runs together. Paranoia is a great example. There's a difference between what was a fear inside the person now is a fear outside the person. It not only belongs to the person, it belongs to the world. And so Oswald, as we look at his psychiatric record, had a very, very weak ego. And that's very clear in the report by Renatus Hartogs, the psychiatrist who was in charge of his case and who testified to the Warren Commission. There were other people as well, the social workers and so forth, who interviewed him and made comments, all of which Hartogs had seen. And his testimony is very important for understanding Oswald. He later wrote a book on Oswald called The Two Assassins, which is worth reading. There's more in it than Oswald. There's more in it than about Oswald than was actually in the original record. But it really is quite valuable. There's a hardcover and a paperback of that. It was written in about 1966. And I might point out as an isolated fact, Hartogs is on record in 1966 in a newspaper interview in which he claims that Oswald's personality was such that he would never psychologically be comfortable with being in the conspiracy. And I have actually said this for a long time. I mean, part of his nosology, the symptomatology he has and the reasons for it make him isolated. And that means that he's going to be very reluctant and resistant to working with anybody in any way whatsoever. And so, it's hard to convince a conspiracy theorist about this because, what do you know? I mean, I had a recent discussion online with a person who told me that everybody he knows can tell when somebody's crazy, and he didn't want me talking in this way about the human psyche. I said, so you prefer ignorance? He said, no, I know when somebody's crazy, and Oswald wasn't crazy. Well, this is not going to get us anywhere, and it's not analytic, and it's certainly not knowledge, that's for sure.
Okay? Right, yeah.
So that's the case with Oswald. So the diagnosis of Oswald, which is in Hartog's report, and you can get it online. The best place to go is to go to Hartog's testimony in the Warren Commission, and at the end of the testimony, there's a typed version of his report. The original version of the report that you get online is a photostat, and it's a negative, so it's got a black background and it's hard to read. So, but you can get the same thing at the end of his testimony, and in fact, all that testimony by the people at the Youth House in New York City in 1953, which is where Oswald was in fact analyzed, is important to look at. So we find that Oswald, at the age of 12, 13, is a chronic truant and gets cited and then gets referred to the Youth House, where he's treated by social workers and therapists and is seen by the psychiatrist, given tests, et cetera, et cetera. And most of us know that in the long run, he was there for a while. His mother was interviewed. There were recommendations made that he get further therapy, and his mother then moved him out of town and back to the Southwest they went. And that was the end of it. So everybody knows that story. But while he was there, they discovered that he was, as Hartogs puts it, he was more seriously disturbed than the truancy charge warranted, and he was struck by that. He said this guy was so disturbed that I'm surprised he was only in here on truancy.
Hmm.
And that's very important to realize because that's a phenomenal report by the psychiatrist, who's a very experienced guy, by the way. Okay, and so I mean, he testifies to that to Liebler in the Warren Commission. So what do they find? Well, they find as a diagnosis that Oswald has a personality disturbance. Today, the language is personality disorder. It doesn't say in the report, but it's most likely it's a narcissistic personality disorder, okay? Which is not tremendously precise, but it's different from other kinds of personality disorders in some way. And so, and that this personality disorder had schizoid patterns, schizoid, which doesn't mean schizophrenia. It means isolation and separation. It's schizoid patterns. It's a very serious thing to say. It means, in ordinary language, he's a loner, but in clinical language, he's necessarily isolated. You see, there's a difference. There's a kind of causal claim being made here. And so that's basically what the diagnostic category is. Hartog's notes, and this is very important for Oswald, he's filled with fantasies of omnipotence and power. And so this is very primitive stuff going back into one's own personal history. This is very early stuff. And as Hartog points out at various points of his testimony, this problem that Oswald had predates anything that he did in school or anything. It comes early on. You know, as a kind of aside for people who may not know this, but most people know this, everybody knows who studied Oswald, even from the conspiracy point of view. He never had a father. His real father died while he was in utero.
Yeah.
His mother was batshit crazy, you know, self-involved, et cetera, and that's in the reports from Youth House. And she didn't appear to care about him at all. His brothers were aloof to him. He never had a male to identify with, and so that's the basic element in Hartog's what shall I say, choreography of the family, or the choreography of the partial family, that he never had a male to identify with, and he thought that in the long run, if he could get a male therapist, that might make some difference to him because he could use the male as a sounding board. Now, in this kind of discussion, as a kind of aside, for boys, the male is important because the boy identifies with the male, usually it's with the father, and takes on the father's role in life in a kind of emulation. It's a deep, kind of subconscious emulation, but it's necessary for socialization into a culture to do something like this, so that when you're 2 years old, you begin to learn how to act. Okay. Right. And that's what you do, which is why parenting is so important for people. And so Oswald didn't have that. He simply didn't have it. So he's running open loop, if you will, with no feedback, nobody to chastise him. No, you do it this way, son, not that way. You know, he's none of that. He's ignored. So it's a serious situation. And Hartog's is very clear. This is serious. And what's of note here is that part of the diagnosis is that he has another feature to his ailment, which is that he's extremely passive aggressive. Okay, it's a diagnosis, and passive aggressive is a relatively rare condition. In the strength in which he observed it in Oswald, and his testimony is to that. What does it mean? It means that he is now using his sense of alienation as a kind of weapon to get back at the environment that he's in. That's what passive aggression does. To be passive aggressive is to do things that throw a monkey wrench into the activities of other people. Okay. So, you say you're going to do something, then you don't do it. Okay. Or you say I'm doing it the right way and you're doing it another way. There are various ways of doing this. There were too many people I grew up with who were like this. I mean, I don't want to talk about them much. I put my fist through the screen. But I had a colleague like this when I was teaching. It's unbelievable. And so, yeah, I'll do that. And the next day he didn't do it. Why didn't you do it? Well, I don't remember we talked about it. Oh, please, what, I got to record all of our conversations? Huh? This is what you get. Okay. This was Oswald. It's very clear. And Hartog makes a big deal about it in his testimony. He said, this is really where the incipient violence is. The fantasies are another symptom of the same violence. And so there's no question this guy's a powder keg. Now, just so people know, that if in fact he's got this kind of disorder, then a full functioning ego like yours or mine or any other normal person is not in play. So what's in play are forces that even he can't control or can't even recognize because his ego is not functioning properly. If his ego were functioning properly, he'd recognize some of his own problems, but it's not. So, you get a kind of delusionary, a kind of self-deception that goes with these conditions. And but the point that Hartog makes about this is that in his report that we see, he doesn't say that that Oswald was dangerous and should be institutionalized. But when he first started his testimony to the Warren Commission, he claims, and as he remembers the case, this was the status of Oswald. Then turns out that Oswald was the topic of a seminar that they held at Youth House with Hartogs and other doctors in which they discussed a particular case. And Oswald came up as a case they discussed. And it was in there, nothing written down, nothing recorded, part of the professional ambiance of the Youth House. They discussed him, in which it was clear that they thought he was dangerous and should be institutionalized. What Hartog suggests at the end of his report, the actual report, was that he get therapy and community support, et cetera, et cetera. And if that doesn't work, then he would get a placement somewhere else. That's the institutionalized side of it. But it's more ambiguous than the way it came up in the seminar. Okay. So he had written the report and then they had the seminar later. So the idea that you can go to Hartog's and show that he didn't think Oswald was dangerous is you can't do that. And this guy sat with Oswald with all these tests and all these previous interviews with his staff, and then with an hour himself, and he's very clear about it. So and he gave his testimony to the Warren Commission without rereading his own report. He rereads his own report during his testimony. So he's working out of memory. So one presumes that there's a lot of authentic memories going on there, and he remembers who he is, okay, and that kind of thing.
Right.
So Oswald, in ordinary language, he's a standard head case who's never going to have any real ability to do anything. And what he's working with here is what we all work with ourselves, only his is distorted. We all have a kind of ego ideal, okay? And what that is again, maybe from our fathers, maybe from our mothers, maybe from our siblings, a kind of picture of what we ought to be like, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this is a complicated matter. If you're religious, it can feed your conscience and then become part of the super ego, and it can modulate your behavior and so forth. Some people identify with Saint Vincent de Paul or Moses Maimonides, and they become a certain kind of person, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And they try to live up to that. And often, if not most of the time, the ego ideal is with us, but not always not always registered in our awareness. It just operates with us as part of the fabric of our ongoing psyche. And so Oswald, having no family to use as ego ideals, no father, no mother, no brothers, then is very susceptible to other kinds of influences. And the biggest influence that he had was when he ran into the notion of Marxism and communism and the Rosenbergs when he was in New York City. Again, part of his biography everybody knows. He was influenced by the Rosenbergs, as you know, were executed in 1953. I still remember it, by the way. And I have an odd personal experience of that. At the time they were executed, the lights in our house dimmed.
Hmm.
And I have no idea why that happened. I mean, I don't know whether it was the exact minute, but it was when they were in the death house, you know? And my father said, see, you know, he didn't like the Rosenbergs. Okay. I mean, he didn't like Jews either. So, that's another story. So he gloms onto this Rosenbergs and then Marxism and communism and so forth. And then as we see, he becomes infatuated with this kind of Marxism communism thing. He becomes well versed in it. Okay. Now let me stop for a minute. When Hartog's, and it's in his review, it's in his report, and it's in his testimony. Hartog's found this guy to be quite bright. And he found him to be, despite the truancy, quite well up on the material that he was supposed to be getting from school, as if he hadn't missed any days.
Right, right.
Okay, so this is very important. At the same time, when pushed by Hartog's to go back to school, Oswald reported that if he went back to school, he would need remedial help, and he wouldn't really know how to proceed and what to do. And Hartog's inference from that's very clear is this guy is better than he judges himself. So he has a very poor self-evaluation. Again, that goes with having a weak ego. And he has very low self-esteem, which goes about, this kind of impoverished ego. Okay. And so I thought that was very significant in this case. And so, the only thing that given his profile, the only thing that can satisfy this felt deficit that he has is to lash out, because the passive aggressivity is really what he uses to interact with the environment. If he's passive, then he's isolated. And if he can do something that's aggressive without it being recognized, then he's getting away with it even more. He's still being schizoid, but he's having an effect paying everybody back. This is a kind of sophisticated defense of the ego. It doesn't nourish the ego, but it defends his feelings of being in the world and being stable. Okay. Hartog suspects, and I think I agree with him, that this guy was fantasizing all the time. What do we know about that? Well, we know about it because Marina reported this. He's always playing these spy games, and he's I was a communist for the FBI, and I led 3 lives and all that stuff that we hear about him. So he was into that kind of fantasy, and so I suspect that he had a rich fantasy life of that sort. He used these pseudonyms, which is a dead giveaway to a guy who is juggling a weak ego. Now he's Heidel, now he's Oswald, whatever. And so, and he takes on the kind of, Russian element to which is his fantasy from Marxism, communism of, Alex, and so it's very clear what happens here. So what's important now is how would we talk about motivation with Oswald? Because this is where it comes up in the discussions with conspiracy theorists. I mean, they say, well, he had no motive, and this is a difficult topic. I mean, I have a lot to say about it. I won't say as much as I want to, because it's a confusing topic. There is a book on it from the 60s by R.S. Peters called The Concept of Motivation. It's in the Rutledge Keegan Philosophy of Psychology series, which is quite a good series. And it talks about the different uses of the word motive and motivation and so forth. It doesn't give clear-cut answers, but it makes distinctions that people should be aware of, okay? So let's go to Oswald with this psychology in mind. what does this psychology imply to start with? Well, he's very impulsive, okay? Because he's working not with a complete intact ego, but he's working from elements that are buried in the subconscious and are parts of strategies like passive aggressivity and fantasies and so forth, and isolation, so that he simply is not able to make an effect, have an effect on the environment. And so it's not easy to say exactly what motivates him at a particular moment in time. We can say that there is a sense in which motive means a reason for doing something. Okay, that's a trivial notion. It happens to be true. So if you say that Oswald have a motive, uh, does that mean you're asking whether did he have a reason to kill Kennedy? This is an odd way to put the question because of his psychological structure. The idea of rationality or a reason is not, it's not uppermost, and so you look more for a kind of impulse that fits his passive aggression and fits his fantasy life. That he's more impulse driven. Now there's a whole cluster of things that go around the passive aggressive dimension. It's mentioned anywhere you want to look on the internet if you want to look it up. But he's uncooperative, he's anti-authoritarian, he's recalcitrant, he's controlling, he's negative. That all goes with it. I mean, after a while, it becomes useless as a category, but that goes with this particular thing, as opposed to somebody who's not passive aggressive, who doesn't bathe in this kind of activity. So to say that we're looking for a reason why Oswald killed Kennedy is not the right way to ask the question about why Oswald did this. Okay, so to say, well, what was it? Did he have a motive then, in any sense of the word motive? Well, he had a sense. He had a motive in the sense that motive is not a reason, but in fact a theme. The way a motif is in Beethoven. There's a beginning, middle, and a coda. And that's it. And so there is a style and a personality style and a characterology to Oswald's behavior that we know about. Scott Maudsley gave a lot of detail on that. It was very helpful. But you can see what that is. And so there's a motif in there. And the motif is, in fact, what Hartog says about him. Passive aggressive, the aggressive side is what really is the purpose in that dimension, and fantasies of omnipotence and power. In his in Oswald's interactions at Youth House, he admitted that he got very angry and homicidal towards his mother, occasionally hit her, often because she didn't bring food home for supper. And this is part of the detail. So this is, you want to ask, well, why did he kill Kennedy? Well, let's look at something like this. What is this about? What is Kennedy for him? What does Kennedy do for his ego? Now, here we don't have any information, okay? We can only go by the armature of his psyche. So it's hard to say. My guess is that certainly Kennedy is an authority figure, and certainly he's a father figure, so that at best he's an ambivalent figure for Oswald. He's always desired a father, always looking for a male role model, et cetera, et cetera. And he's also, passive aggressive and anti-authority and negative and so forth. So anybody like that is going to be a plus minus figure for him, is going to be an ambivalent figure. And so it's going to arouse a lot of the emotion, a lot of the psychic energy that's underneath his frazzled ego. And it comes out in his acts of violence. I mean, he hit Marina sometimes, he hit his mother, he pulled a knife on his sister-in-law, he shot BBs at apartment buildings in the Bronx, he was in fights and disputes and was court-martialed in the Marines. We got enough data here to fit into Hartog's, schemata. It's very clear that he did break out into violence, and because the Kennedy assassination is the ultimate act of violence for this character.
Yeah.
Years ago, in a discussion with Pat Collins and some other people on Facebook, I suggested, and this is some time ago, maybe 8 years ago, I suggested to people that Oswald enjoyed killing Kennedy. Well, nobody, even the people who were lone nutters or lone gunmen, they never entertained that because Oswald was still a cipher to everybody. This guy enjoyed the hell out of shooting Kennedy because, in fact, it's what his personality structure looked like. You know, omnipotence, power, passive aggression, pay them back, et cetera, et cetera. And all that energy is as Freud would say, affected towards goals like this. And so this is not a mystery at all. So he doesn't have a motive, but he's in a motivational state. No question about it. And the motivational state is very clearly etched and not puzzling at all. So it comes up again when we take the killing of the policeman, which was gratuitous. The guy's down and out and he shoots him in the head anyway. Okay? Walks away. What does he say? Well, we have two versions of it. One of them is poor dumb cop.
Yeah.
He doesn't care about anybody because, in fact, he's aggressive, omnipotence, power, et cetera, et cetera. People say this about people now. I mean, I'm not going to raise anybody's name, but, people say this about people now. People in the headlines. They say, well, he doesn't care about anybody. Just wants to do what he wants to do, This is not new to us. And so, well, would he kill anybody? Well, yeah, sure he would, So already killed people, And this is what Oswald did. So the idea that, and also the idea that he's a perfect ploy figure for the government to use as a setup man is just, the facts just don't warrant that, I mean, he's not going to listen to anybody, this guy. He's completely by himself. We all know that that the Hartog's judgment is correct because during the Marines and so forth, he milked this communist Marxism stuff to its hilt. Okay, they called him Oswalski or whatever it was, and
Oswaldovich.
Yeah, a comrade Oswald and so forth, because he was always offering this as part of his shtick, because that's what he'd identified with, because he doesn't have any really normal material in his ego to use. So he takes on this adopted thing. So this gets me to the question that comes up, and I've had disagreements with people on it. So he killed Kennedy because he was a communist or a Marxist, the Johann Rush view or Carlos Berger, whatever. No, he didn't. He happened to be a kind of communist or Marxist. He said he was not a communist but a Marxist in that interview in New Orleans. 6 1/2 dozen that doesn't matter. He wasn't a capitalist, that's for sure, and he wasn't a democratic society figure either.
Right.
So, but he didn't kill Kennedy because he was a communist. Because if he had a normal upbringing, he wouldn't have killed Kennedy. And so, and plus, there are millions of communists who don't kill people just because they're communists. Yeah. So this is an incorrigible notion. A lot of people go through the case and they look at it and say, oh, he said, see, he killed him because he's a communist. It's obvious. It's obvious if you're in a bar talking about it. It's obvious if you're talking over the supper table. It's not explanatory, and it leads to a contradiction when you try to make it work as a cause. It doesn't work as a cause. And so, of course, he uses his ego ideal as a communist to feed his fantasies. But his fantasies are innervated or driven by the deep turmoil inside of his psyche, which goes back to the aggressivity and so forth, the dominance and the lack of connection to other human beings, and that's basically it.
And he told he basically thought he was going to be a great man. Was that part of it?
Sure, it is because I mean he's nothing now. I mean the fact that he can't evaluate his own scholastic level. Okay, even though he was reading Marx at the age of 14. How many kids do this? Not many. Okay. And his IQ is above average. They gave him the Stanford Binet. He was about 120, so he's above average. And so but in fact, he doesn't really know what he can be. He can't evaluate himself, so he can be a great man then because he doesn't set any limitations on himself in that sense. Okay, but he thinks he can't do anything. He has low self-esteem, so he's in a push-pull situation even at that level. He's in conflict at that level. Can he be great? Yes. Can he do anything? No. You know, is he great? No. Can he do anything? Yes. And he's in a very polarized situation inside of his head.
Right.
You and I, for example, while we might have a thing or two that's inane and we persist in spite of evidence, in general are in internal harmony about, yeah, I think I can do that, and then go ahead and do it. You know, I mean, that's basically what we are.
Right.
And most normal people are like that, regardless of what level they're at in IQ or anything. Most normal people are like that, and therefore they get along in the world. You know, they don't kill presidents. So you know that you know. So I think I've gotten rid of this Marxism as a cause, although it's very important for him to feed his fantasies. Now, is it possible that he saw Kennedy as a kind of figure in a Marxist fantasy? Yes. And in that sense, Gene Davidson's suggestion in Oswald's Game that hearing Kennedy speak against Castro set this guy off a little bit, that's quite possible and may in fact be true. There's no way of telling. We can't prove it. But certainly Kennedy's, what shall I say, less than cordial relationship with Khrushchev, 62, and you know, the shoe on the table, and we will bury you, and all this, the Cuban Missile Crisis, et cetera, et cetera. There's a scenario there that Oswald could have really glommed onto in his fantasies, and just dropped his fantasies of omnipotence and power onto a figure like Khrushchev or somebody like that. After all, Oswald had been to Russia. He spoke the language, you know, so it's very easy for him to fantasize.
He also had fantasies of he wanted to go to Cuba. He wanted to be a part of that revolution, to guide that revolution.
That's right. Yeah. He wanted to be on the front page. Yeah. I mean, Castro was in his prime PR mode at that point, 1963. Yeah.
I mean, it's delusional that he thought, okay, if I get to Cuba, they're going to go listen to me. That I can actually,
well, of course,
to guide them.
Yeah. I think he thought that his Russian, his ability to speak some Russian was a kind of cachet for him. I think he believed that was a good Union card. I mean, it's hard to say, you know. I mean, this is conjecture now, but I mean, this is the kind of thing that would come up in his mind. I mean, he did speak Russian. He had a Russian wife. His Russian wasn't fantastic, but he could speak it, and he could go to Cuba and he could speak some Russian, and therefore, he would be lionized. This guy lived in Russia, and of course, when he was in Mexico City and took the gun out and so forth, if we believe that testimony from the Russian ambassador, that he pulled out a gun and said that he couldn't kill Kennedy, then this really does suggest that the scenario of Khrushchev versus Kennedy is a kind of model for his fantasy life at that particular point in time. But again, he's in that position not because he's a communist, but he's a communist because he's in that position psychologically from a much earlier time, as Hartog shows us from his own psychological history. So that's all there is to it. I mean,
and also, do you also find it interesting that he sort of seemed to enjoy sort of toying with the police after his arrest?
Yes. Yeah.
That was a bit of a game to him. Like, hey, I've got information, I know stuff, and I'm not going to tell you right now.
Well, he's playing games with the Patsy comment, even, and he's also showing contempt for them with that. By the way, I'm just a patsy. He's saying they're dumb asses. That's what I mean. It's in his voice as well. You can hear it. And he says it with great force. I'm just a patsy. And he's asserting his ego. It's a fantasy. I mean, it's ridiculous. And so, I mean, he's really a damaged person from the word go. He's damaged in 1953 and he's damaged in 1963. I mean, as a kind of aside here,
Right.
I've had a lot of the CT people argue with me and say, well, he's 24 when this happened. He grew out of it. You don't outgrow this, man. I mean, this is not, well, I used to be 5'2", but now I'm 6'3", and I can play in the NBA. It's not like that, It's ridiculous. And so, but that's we are in an age where people don't know anything. So, if you drop something on them like what I'm doing here right now and what you were talking with me about, they're very skeptical of it. Rather than trying to dig in and figure out where its value is, they tend to reject it because it's beyond their ken at this present time. Period. I don't know. So I think that's it. I mean, I think that I mean there are details we could use. I think the idea of fantasy is very, very important when considering Oswald, and it's the thing that's most ignored in Oswald. And this leads me to the conclusion, or to a kind of statements in general about fantasy. Okay, um, you heard me say this in our first time when I was on here, that I think the Western world is that ordinary life is filled with fantasy now, and I'll say something about that. But that's when we look at the JFK case. Okay, what we see here, not just in the case per se, but in the analysis of the case by CTs, an incredible fantasy world on the conspiracy side. Okay.
Yeah.
And this suggests, and they think it's real. I have people writing to me saying, you still don't get it, do you? And I write back and say, no, because I'm not paranoid. That's why I don't get it, And so the reason why they don't, then they can't resonate with Oswald's fantasy is because they're filled with fantasy themselves. I mean, some of these scenarios, we've had a reappearance of the two Oswald theory now. Have you seen this recently?
Yeah.
John Armstrong's book?
Yep.
I met Armstrong one time, okay, at one of these meetings. This guy should be selling, snowballs to Eskimos. I mean, come on. Yeah, it's ridiculous. I mean, it's just, I heard his first paper where he looked at a recycled Social Security number and claimed it was conspiracy. And somebody in the audience said, well, these things have been recycled. Really? I mean, it's just, just so, the two Oswald, first appeared in a book by Richard Popkin. Popkin was this great philosopher who still has a definitive book on the history of skepticism from the 60s. It's a tremendous book. I don't know what happened to him. Well, the same thing happened to Bertrand Russell, who thought that was conspiracy as well. Russell's one of the giants of 20th century philosophy. But in any case, he had, Popkin had this two Oswald thing, and we had other books about it, Endo's book, and they had Dig Up the Grave. Is it really Oswald or it is doppelganger? It really is him. And there's no merit to this. Who would think this? What kind of idea is this? This is an ideation with no physical instantiation, whatever. And what's the point of having two Oswalds if you're if you're running a conspiracy? Why have two Oswalds? Well, you can do this. You can you can deflect. You can divert. You can distract. Yeah, but you run this to its fullness, you find out that it doesn't lead anywhere and ends up in contradictions. I in a response online I gave recently with a guy who was Chuck, somebody who's been putting up this to Armstrong stuff, Moshula or something is his name. You can't. I mean, he's not going to drop this. I said if there were two Oswalds, they were both in the sixth floor window at the same time shooting the same gun. Nobody got the joke,
Well, I find it amazing. Like, take the Bolton Ford incident. I mean, they actually believe that somebody was impersonating Oswald before Kennedy was inaugurated.
Unbelievable.
While he was in Russia, they're impersonating Oswald. I mean, in fact, I solved that one.
Yeah.
The Oswald in that case was probably Oswald Schulenkamp, who was the head of a truck company next door to Bolton Ford.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make sense at all, and
No, no.
they won't stop.
It's very satisfying though to the conjurer because the fantasy level of it, and energizes them, which is why they can argue. Well, you don't know anything. You'll believe anything they say. I mean, this is fantasy speaking, and so the idea that they would recognize that fantasy was in fact driving Oswald to a certain degree, it was marshaling his psychological energy. This would never occur to them. This is like speaking a foreign language to them. They're not going to know any of this. I mean, I wouldn't imagine what somebody like Eugenio would say to what I've just said here about Oswald. I mean, I can't imagine what he would say.
Well, he would say that Oswald was an agent. I mean, an agent. I mean, would the CIA employ somebody like Oswald to be an agent? And it just doesn't make sense.
They realized he was, in ordinary language, he's a serious misfit. This guy. I mean, he lied about his mother to get out of the Marines. They changed his discharge, to an undesirable. He got out on a hardship discharge. I mean, this is, he wasn't honest at all. As Jared Posner has shown, Oswald, when he was questioned, he was very dishonest in answering questions about the weapon and so forth. The whole question of guilt and the fact that he had done this, and now that they've caught him, he's had his orgasm, if you will, when he shot Kennedy and Tippit. He's had it. Now he's got to go since he's not schizophrenic and he's not psychotic, he can perfectly well play games with them back in the passive aggressive mode again and manipulate reality. But he's not doing anything for other than the kind of manipulation for pleasure anymore. But he appears more in control of himself than he really is in life, because now his fantasized objects of desire, by and large, are no longer available to him. He's in jail. I would have liked to see what would happen had he not been shot by Ruby, to be honest with you. That would have been very interesting. I think we would have been in a very different way here,
I think that one of the problems what I find interesting is we have all of these mock trials that go on, but the problem with any mock trial is we don't know how Oswald would have what he would have told his defense attorney in the way he would have wanted to defend himself.
Exactly.
And so that's an important thing, because that's the whole point of it. I mean, we don't know. Would he want to make a political statement? Would he just want to be quiet? I mean, who knows? We just don't know.
It's hard to say. I mean, because he doesn't have the kinds of options that he had in normal life, where he was able to manipulate people, he was able to hit people, and he was able to kill people. He can't do that anymore. So his options are down. He may fantasize more, may fantasize himself as as some kind of allegorical prisoner, Sacco Vanzetti or even Beria, Molotov. He could do anything. Yeah, he could do anything like that, and he would be likely to do something like that. And what that would entail for his defense, I don't know. I mean, I can imagine lawyers quitting on him. I mean, but that's why I say it would have been interesting to see what would have happened.
Yep.
Had he been around, because I think then more people would have seen how aberrant this guy was.
Right, they would have, and I also think that it would not have been a long trial. He would have been found guilty. It would have been
rather quickly. It's an open and shut case on the evidence.
Yeah,
unbelievable. His
so,
fingerprints were on the gun, and somebody identified and shooting him in the gun.
And then would he be like a Sirhan character in prison, asserting his innocence and having people like Eugenio saying, "Oh yeah, we need to release him."
It's like Sirhan and Robert J. Kennedy Jr.
I mean, it's hard to. I mean, my God, can you imagine? I mean, if Sirhan was released, you'd have RFK Jr. throwing a party for him.
It's unbelievable. That's how bad this is, and that's why I say. I mean, there's an example. RFK Jr. is an example of what it means when you use fantasy for knowledge. He has fantasized versions of the scientific literature on vaccinations.
Yep.
He has fantasized versions of the murder of his uncle, his father, and so forth. And he's running with those fantasized versions. That he's really grappling with this is important to realize that this guy was a heroin addict for at least a decade, and that he's now pumping up all the time because he's trying to create a certain kind of image. Conclusion: his ego's not so strong either. He's not really, so he's got to really do things to patch himself together. And what's interesting about it is, he's smart enough to know that the vaccine policy that he's pushing will result in some people's dying. He's smart enough to know this, yet it doesn't seem to faze him. It's like Oswald walking away from the Tippit murder. It's very similar to me. And I'm not making a moral claim here. I'm making a psychological point.
Yeah.
You can say whatever you want about it morally. I don't care. But this is what happens when people do this, I mean, you can use examples where, it's, I don't know, if people turn on their families and kill their families. I mean, it goes on. We have things like this all the time. So,
well, one problem for Oswald, if he tried to make some sort of political defense, was that he shot a policeman, and
yes,
becomes hard to say, you're acting on behalf of against American imperialism, but then you shoot a working class guy.
Well, what's interesting about the comment "pure dumb cop" is that it vilifies Tippit as a useful victim cog in the capitalist scheme.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that's really what it does. And I thought about that years ago. I said, well, this is his Marxism speaking out of his cognition. And that, this guy, he doesn't feel bad for him. He puts a bullet in his head while he's on the ground because, in fact, he's just another piece in the chess game capitalism is playing against Marxism, the true philosophy of humankind. And so again, it's an inflated view. So I mean, once we have something to say about it, a lot of the things that he said become more and more important, have different kind of significance.
What do you think about Jack Ruby and his psychology?
Well, I read this stuff, and I'm further away from it than I am from Oswald. I followed his trial very closely, and I was in an abnormal psych course at the time, and we had studied this kind of psychomotor epilepsy, which was also called Jacksonian epilepsy, and there were a lot of cases coming up, and people didn't know what to do with it. But you got this kind of ongoing, agitated type of person who would explode at various times, in a day or in a week or something like that. And they were postulating certain kinds of neural pathology of undisclosed nature and undetected nature because of the rapid, almost instinctual way it showed itself. It came out of nowhere. It was like a fixed action pattern in an animal in the forest. Oh, and they do this when that happens, and he clawed his eyes out, that's basically what it is. And so that's Ruby. I mean, I see that with Ruby.
Yeah, I'm struck when he had lunch with Breck Wall and Joe Peterson, and they tell Ruby, we're gonna pull our show from your club, and he punches Peterson right in the mouth.
Right in the mouth, yeah.
And they were like shocked. That's the ferocious.
Yeah. I mean, this is it. And listen, this guy was a minor mafia character. Okay, kind of like he was a subcontractor of sorts. And it really was restricted to coffee and donuts. And basically he was somebody that the mafia didn't want to touch either. This guy's dangerous for them. I mean, because you had to keep people like this under wraps. And so I think certainly Ruby was paranoid. Okay, and while Oswald was a narcissistic personality disturbance or narcissistic personality disorder. And it is true that narcissism is right on the borderline with paranoia. The paranoid is the ultimate narcissist. It's not only that he's the center of attention, but that they're also trying to get him. That's how important he is. Okay, so paranoia and narcissism are very close to each other, and so you have with Ruby a particular kind of narcissism, and he's paranoid as hell. He grew up in the streets of Chicago, an unusual life for a Jewish family. He was a street thug. He was very good with his hands. He was tough, and it's just not the average image for a Jewish person in the inner cities. Okay,
Yep.
And so he simply was he wasn't particularly bright, but any of the interviews we see with him, when he starts talking about, well, the world will never know, et cetera, he's a paranoid. This guy, I mean, he's just a paranoid. And so he really thought, when he said he thought that they were going to blame the Jews for the murder, et cetera, and he didn't want Mrs. Kennedy to come back and be subjected to all that kind of pressure to answer these questions, and just wanted to get rid of Oswald. It's a very primitive act. It's very primitive. I have no doubt that I mean, the fact that he got into the building and down the ramp and into the building, people say, well, how is it going to happen? Didn't they know? This kind of thing happens all the time.
Yeah, no, I think that it really was an impulsive act on Ruby's part.
Absolutely.
And that's why after the fact he came up with all these different explanations.
Oh,
Jews have
yes.
balls.
Yes.
I want to save Mrs. Kennedy from coming, and that's
Yeah,
why the
yeah.
lawyer when he said he wanted to save Jackie from coming for a trial. His lawyer said that's a good one because
Yes.
it was an impulsive act. Okay, if you're going to say something, say that.
Yeah.
Better than saying Jews have balls.
Yeah, well, I mean that's a real problem. I mean, and of course we know from his lawyers that at the end, I mean, Tannehill said this, that he said there was never a conspiracy. I mean, he did it by himself. I mean,
That's right. What do you think? Have you heard the new theory that basically Jolyon West did one of the psychiatric interviews with Ruby, and of course he was an MK Ultra participant in the 1950s, and so therefore he did something to Ruby to make him slightly crazy. Part of MK Ultra.
What did he do? Put feathers in his shoes or what? What did he do?
He injected him with some drugs or something
Oh,
during
God,
the interview, and it made him crazy.
Listen, we had that when Robert Groden came to my class. One of my students, towards the end of his lecture, got so fed up with him when he was asking why we didn't believe what he's saying. This guy, Dan Bornstein, it was, I still remember him, stood up and said, well, because, it's just like believing that they gave Ruby cancer. And Groden said, yeah, they gave him cancer, And so we said, how do you give somebody cancer? What are you talking about? Give him an injection. I mean, this is, talk about fantasy, Fred.
Yeah.
They don't even know how injections work. There's a physical chemistry to an injection. Yeah. And if you want to throw away the physical chemistry, yeah, I got an injection here. It's like, let's make Bela Lugosi, the guy with the syringe in his hand. I will now put the brain of my son into your head.
Yeah, I did a blog post where even Cyril Weck said that's ridiculous about injecting cancer. But then I posted, and then all of a sudden people are going, oh, no, it's quite easily. Yes, you can do it. They just, they'll just say anything.
Look, Fred, when I was on here the last time, I told you that, look, the JFK case has pushed tabloid thinking to the mainstream. And so this is what you get in the mainstream now. People saying things like that. I mean, RFK Jr. has said very recently, the evidence shows that vaccines don't prevent the diseases they're supposed to. This is false.
Yep.
This is false. So, the autopsy report in the RFK case shows that Sirhan couldn't do it. This is false, okay? Goes on and on. And so that's what we have with the CT community, with conspiracy theorists. And just to rehash it a bit, you and I both know there is no conspiracy theory that's worked out in some kind of fashion with sane assertions and propositions
No.
and causal connections that you can actually test or even entertain for a very long time. They're
No,
all nonsense.
there's
They're
no,
all
I mean,
nonsense.
all they have are some allegations, but they can't put together a coherent theory that explains
Absolutely
all the
no connection to
evidence.
anything. Yeah, as I say online, you can say anything about this if you want. Yeah, give me a human event, I'll get 15 people in here to say a different story about it. Doesn't mean that they're connected. I mean, and that's basically it. So it's. But listen, the conspiracy notion has become a part of it, the big deal now. The other side of this as well, and this in a way that's different from the way I know it. You know it because you're very intimately familiar with a lot of details. You studied things that I haven't looked at, and so you know stuff that I don't know, and so on. So you've got a real, what I would say, a hardly chiseled knowledge base on certain kinds of things, and this makes it clear to you that when people don't know something, they'll say something outrageous, and you give them the fruits of your analysis to show them, no, they didn't. The person didn't say that. They said this. They didn't mean that. They said that. They meant this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so we have a culture that doesn't want to know enough detail about anything. They also don't want to know the theory behind anything. Okay,
No,
so
no, I call it, as I told you earlier, I call it invincible ignorance.
it's no way around it. And so, as long as we're in open societies, this kind of thing will not go away. You know, and that's all there is to it. I mean, I find myself in a kind of enigma because you find out that some agencies of the government can do things that you're in support of, and yet at the same time you don't like the way they did it, and so you're not in support of them. You know, it's a real problem. I mean, I've got my grandson, who was the one that works for FAIR. We talked about him the last time. He took me to the doctor yesterday and was here and so forth, and we talk all the time. And he's 28. He's a terrific guy, and he's got the same notion of the way in which people fantasize things. He said, well, I mean, I like what so and so did here, but we can't not consult Congress on this, or we can't not investigate whether these boats have drugs on them. I mean, so that kind of thing. So when you look at the political discussions, they're just like the discussions in the JFK case.
Yeah.
You can do this, you can do that. You don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. You can just go and kill them. You don't need to find out the drugs. No, you don't need to find out the drugs. It's crazy. So I mean, I'm not sure whether the natural processes of open discussion will sort this stuff out.
Well, just look at the nonsense coming from Anna Paulina Luna with
Please.
their subcommittee on declassification,
Oh,
where she had two sets of hearings where she brings together Doug Horn and all these conspiracy people.
Doug Horn.
You know,
I would love to see what a psychiatrist says, man. There's something wrong with that guy.
I
I've seen interviews with him. He's possessed by some demon I don't want to look at. It's
so
unbelievable.
it's very discouraging, and and she's going to write a report. She's going to write a report about the JFK
Oh, I know we
assassination.
spent money on this. We spent money on this,
Yeah,
okay? And even though her name is appropriate, Luna for her,
yeah.
it doesn't help anymore. I don't get any satisfaction out of that anymore. The idea that she wouldn't read the material in at least a little bit before embarking on this and spending all this money on this is beside me. It's a kind of responsibility. Well, let me find out whether what there is to this conspiracy stuff. They don't believe the Warren Commission because they don't believe the government. So there must be an anti-government notion in here. You still hear people who are like her say, "Let's drain the swamp." This is not political talk. Draining the swamp is not political talk, although
No.
it occurs in a political context. It's a fantasy to drain the swamp. You see, it's a figurative way of talking about real human activity. It's not correct.
Yeah.
And as long as that becomes a byword, then everybody who's using these words is going to be misled in their thinking and won't be able to sort things out at various points along the way. That's the way it goes.
Yep, and she goes on Joe Rogan to say, "Oh, I really believe that our advanced technology today is from aliens. That we've reversed engineered all this technology, and that's why we have cell phones and stuff."
I didn't know she did that. She's on
And
Joe Rogan.
she thinks there's biologics being hidden by the U.S. government from UFOs and stuff.
What was Rogan's response?
Oh, yeah, quite possibly. He thinks it's possibly true.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
The funniest one was he asked her. He actually asked her if they're going to look for the Ark of the Covenant.
No kidding.
And she says, "Oh, we found the Ark of the Covenant. The CIA did some remote viewing experiments where they put somebody in a room, and he found the Ark of the Covenant." And Joe Rogan says, "Wow."
So where is it?
Oh, it's somewhere in the Middle East or something. But remote viewing, where you put somebody in a room,
Yeah,
and think about it.
Simple. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it was all nonsense, and she thinks this is real.
You see the magic in that kind of thing, the fantasy and the magic.
Yep.
Action at a distance. Well, we can see through this stuff, no problem. Yeah, yeah. Oh, you like Superman with X-ray vision? Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Only, I'm not vulnerable to kryptonite, so I'm better off than Superman. Yeah. No, this is the world we live in. This is a congressperson. This is a representative.
Yep.
Who's she representing? My goodness.
It's really frightening. So, yep. Well, look, thank you very much for appearing. There's so much more to talk about, but I think we'll have to have you on another time to discuss more stuff. But thank you very much for coming
listen, it's
on
my
the podcast.
pleasure. I really enjoyed it, and the time just flew by, Fred.
Yeah.
Because I have the fantasy that you and I are going to be broadcast out to millions of people, and they'll all get their minds right.
That's a great fantasy. I share it too.
Yeah,
it's not reality.
Until the blip disappears on the computer.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good luck. I'll talk to you soon.
Another interview.
Ciao.